Nintendo's Amiibo figures look great as they are, but customizing is a way of making them even more special. I'm TJ, and it's my mission to make the map that removes the mystery from Amiibo to help you chart the course to conquer your favorite custom challenges and achieve the unique and personalized Amiibo you always wanted. Let me make the mistakes so you don't have to.
Adventure time! I'm bored already.
That's me, TJ, and Dark TJ. They'll be popping up from time to time to offer some tips, tricks, and helpful hints.
Don't listen to anything this guy has to say. He has no idea what he's doing.
Or not so helpful. It's dangerous to go alone, so come with us and we'll conquer this custom together. Welcome to Custom Conquest. Hey everybody, you found your way back for another episode of Custom Conquest. The custom Koopalings continue, this time featuring Morton Koopa.
I love Morton. His face looks as much like a clown as his car does. Tell me this whole Koopaling series isn't just going to be a bunch of remakes of the first one.
I really want to avoid doing that, so while there are a lot of similarities to the process of making all of the Koopalings, there are a lot of distinct differences as well, and that's what I really want to highlight. So instead of rehashing everything that we introduced you to in the previous episode, there will be times where I'm just going to refer you back to the first episode, and that way you don't hear me just saying the same things over and over again, because that would be boring for you and probably boring for me.
Ain't no way this show gets boring as long as I'm here. You can lose the other guy though. Hey!
So instead, we're going to take all the things that are special and unique about Morton Koopa, and we're going to make sure that we get you all set up so that you can make your very own custom Morton Koopa Jr. That's his full name, if you didn't know. Let's get to it.
As far as the difficulty for Morton is concerned, I'm going to stand by what I said last time, that Larry is the most difficult of all the Koopalings. But that said, you're still going to be really put through your paces. There's a lot of obstacles to overcome, and you're going to have to be really patient. So while he might be marginally less challenging than Larry, I'm still going to rate him a 9. You're going to notice that all the materials we use are the exact same featured in the previous episode, so we won't spend a whole lot of time on it, but keep in mind the application is in many ways wildly different. So let's take a quick look at the components, the figures, pieces, and parts. We're going to start with the Bowser Jr. figure again, because we need that chip and we need that clown car. We're also going to need a Bowser Amiibo, and unlike last time, this figure is going to play a major role in Morton's construction. Now, a few people asked if it had to be from the Smash series, and my opinion is you're going to get a much better result if it is. Aside from the scale being slightly more accommodating, if you look closely, there's a distinct difference in the muzzle area between the two figures. The Mario series Bowser has a distinct raised area in the center where his nose is, while the Smash series has a much gentler transition, making it much more similar to Morton's nose. So I'd recommend sticking with the Smash. We've also got a return appearance from our thumbtacks and paper clips to provide some structure and support. We're also going to bring back our plastic spork, but it's going to have an additional application beyond what we just saw last time. And finally, got our custom vinyl stickers for some of those highly detailed facial features. Over on the equipment side, let's quickly recap our tools and supplies. We're going to use our round nose pliers, have a couple extra on hand if you can, and we're definitely going to need some sculpting putty. You could go with your personal favorite. For Morton, I went with Milliput. Can't forget that super glue for managing those sticky situations and getting us into them. And of course, since this is a top to bottom repaint, we're going to need to have some paint and brushes, including, if you remember from last time, some primer and spray paint. And lastly, you're going to need a cutter and some sandpaper. I used an X-acto knife, and on the sandpaper front, a good medium grade will handle business most of the time. Alright, moving on. Right off the bat, it was hard for me to imagine how I can modify a Bowser Jr. to make him favor the appearance of Morton, because while they possess all the same features, the shape and scale of them are completely different. As I tried to imagine what the easiest way would be, I looked to some of the other figures in the collection, which led me to the most obvious next choice, and that's Bowser. In some of the other games where the Koopalings are featured, like Mario Kart 8 for example, Morton, along with Roy, possess features much more closely resembling Bowser in shape and size than Bowser Jr. So naturally I gravitated to the Bowser Amiibo to help resolve some of those issues. Let's start with what I know I intend to use from Bowser Jr., and that would be a shell and the clown car. Everything else is going to come from the Bowser Amiibo. Taking a look at Bowser's head, his mouth area is a really similar shape, so that's going to work really well. Morton's teeth are proportionally a lot bigger, and he has fewer, so I think we could just trim off or sand down Bowser's teeth, and we'll apply some new ones for Morton. Now, Morton is more or less bald, with the exception of 3 strands of hair that sprout out of the top of his head. So we're going to get rid of Bowser's big red fiery mane. I could attempt to try to modify his eyebrows, but I really think that's going to be too much work. Plus, that's connected to the hair, and it'll come off as one solid piece. I'll remove the horns and probably use some putty to just smooth out that top area. We'll add those 3 sparse hairs on his head, as well as those wiry eyebrows. Most of Bowser's other features are gonna be way too big. While the position of Bowser's hands are really compatible for Morton, they are a little big, and his fingers are a couple knuckle joints too long, but they're a lot closer than Bowser Jr.'s, so let's give him a try. I also think we could use Bowser's arms. They do have a scaled texture to them, whereas Morton's arms are pretty smooth, so we could either fill them in or file them down, but I think reducing the scale is gonna be the better option in this case, so we'll probably file those down a bit. They're also gonna be way too too long, so we'll just figure out what the appropriate length needs to be and go from there. As we covered in the last episode, the reverse of Bowser Jr.'s shell is obscured by his bib. If we remove the bib, we see that the abdominal area is not detailed on the figure, so we are going to have to build that. We might be able to pull something off Bowser there, but I think there's probably a better way to go. There's a good chance we could probably salvage some of Bowser Jr.'s base, purely for the purposes of building on top of, but I'm going to assume most of Morton's torso is going to have to be built. And while it might represent a somewhat large portion of the figure, it's not going to be overly artistically demanding, since we're really just using it as a connective tissue to bring all the other elements together. The clown car, just like from episode 1, we're going to replace the black eyes with some glossy headlights, and because we're going to change the angle of the car on the base, that means we'll have to patch the hole where Bowser Jr.'s car is currently attached, which will then require us to have to do a complete repaint, which is just as well because we have to cover up the orange horizontal dots and replace them with a set of vertical black ones. We'll recolor the propeller and the rim to match Morton, and I think we should be good to go. Koopaling custom construction time! Let's get to work. The first thing we're gonna have to do is disassemble these figures. So we'll take our Bowser Jr. and Bowser and drop them into a pot of boiling water. 30 seconds to a minute should be enough, but if you can't pull them apart fast enough and you start to feel them firming up on you, just throw them right back in. As you saw before, Bowser has a lot of pieces, but all we're gonna focus on is the mouth area, the hands, his wrist bracers, and his arms. We can set the rest of that figure aside. There's a good chance some of those components might be useful for a future custom. Once we get Bowser Jr. separated from the clown car, we can discard most of his pieces with the exception of the shell and his body. I don't need the arms, so we'll remove those, trim the base down a little bit, and then we're going to use that to attach everything else too. Even though I had mentally planned out the process in advance, I couldn't really be certain if all these pieces would be compatible as far as the scale is concerned, Bowser being a lot bigger than Bowser Jr. But I determined that Bowser's hands were my best option, and I'd stick with that middle portion of his arm. But as I tested it, they were looking a little thick, so I decided to trim them down, which didn't hurt at all because they have the texture to them. So I used my X-acto knife to shave them down on the sides and then sanded for what felt like a million years to make them smooth again. If you recall from the last episode, I mentioned my misguided commitment to using as much plastic as possible. But here's a case where I think sculpting those arms would have been a lot faster and a lot less work. The shape is really simple, you're just making a thick log. If you want to save yourself on some time, that might be a better way to go without compromising the quality of the final product. In order to hold all these disparate pieces together, I'm gonna poke some holes in the body with thumbtacks and then feed some paper clips through to form an armature in the position that I want Morton to be. Then once all my pieces are in place, I can fill in the gaps with Milliput, smoothing it out with my hand, a liberal use of water, and some toothpicks. I also did need to include the shell at this point because I wanted to maximize the surface area that Morton took up in the cup of the clown car. He has a really flush fit, and breaking him down after the fact would be a really destructive problem, so I needed to make sure it fit before I got too far into the process. Morton's arms are actually pretty close to the position of Bowser's, including his hands. The right one is almost exact, and for the left one, Bowser's hand is in a supinated position with his hand facing up, and Morton's is the exact opposite. So all I really have to do is rotate the hand into pronation where the palm is facing down. I tolerated the hands for a little while before coming to the conclusion that they were just too big and knobby, which led me to the decision to trim off all the fingers into these stubby little nubs, and then cut the rest of Bowser's hand down into somewhat of a rectangle. And then I glued all those little finger nubbins back to the hand. The shape was pretty crude, but the proportions seemed right, so I was really happy with the decision, although it did take quite a bit of time to sand it down. I removed all the obvious angles with the X-acto knife first, then took off the harshest edges with some sandpaper, and after that I filled it in with Milliput, making it as smooth as I could with some water. Once that was solid, I attacked it with sandpaper again, and wound up with something pretty smooth looking without terribly obvious seams. When it comes to customs, the fact is sometimes we hold ourselves to a higher standard than we even expect from the original figures. Bowser's a really good example of that. You can see on the mouth the way that this figure is connected is as two separate pieces, which does create a very noticeable seam upon close inspection. It's unrealistic for a mass-produced product to be able to have all the personal care and individualized attention that customs have, so while that seam might be acceptable for a Bowser, kind of felt like I needed to fill it in on Morton, so we smoothed that line out. I also had to trim off all the teeth and sanded him down so he's got some nice smooth gums. At the top of the head, all I really need to do is build up on it with some putty and smooth it out. It's a really simple shape, it's just a nice round half circle, but because Morton does have those 3 strands of hair, I decided that at this stage, before it was dry, I was going to stick them in there. That way when the Milliput hardens, they're going to be locked in pretty secure. For the hair on Morton's head and his eyebrows, I decided I'd go with paper clips because they're easy to cut, they respond well to super glue, they're really durable, and I feel like they're about the right thickness. The 3 hairs on his head are just about the same length, they just sprout out at slightly different angles, so I'll stick those in. I'm going to use a slightly thicker paper clip for that. In this case, I'm using one of those colored plastic coated ones. For his eyebrows, I'm going to use the thinnest paper clips I could find, trim them all to the same length, glue them together, and yourself more than a few times. Yeah, so I tried not to touch this as much as I could and relied on the pliers to grab it. It was pretty tricky and sticky, and I'm not gonna lie, it got a little bit frustrating, but I just kept at it until it looked how I wanted it to look. You already know that for Larry Koopa, I used the points of the spork for his teeth. I'm gonna do that same thing here with Morton, but I'm also gonna use the spoon portion of the spork to fabricate the reverse of the shell. I'm gonna use the centermost point where it has the gentlest curve to it. I didn't do any refined measuring here, I just cut it oversized and then kept testing it against the figure until it was the scale I felt it needed to be, and then scored a couple lines across it with an X-acto knife. Then I folded it at that point to accentuate the depression, and I removed a little divot with a small pair of scissors to accentuate the separation. These particular sporks that I had responded to the super glue well enough, but because I did want it to be a flush fit against the body, it required a little bit of bending, so I had to hold it in place a little bit till the super glue was dry. Depending on how much you bend it, you may find you need to do that as well. I'm sure you could accelerate that process with some heat from a hairdryer or something, but unless you got 3 hands, you might just have to wait it out. Morton is in one obvious way very different from the other Koopalings, and that is his color scheme. His body is a much darker skin tone, and his face and head are painted up like a rock star from Kiss. Morton wanna rock and roll all night and party every day. So just like we had to do with the other Koopalings, I needed to interpret how the mapped colors from the trophy would be reflected as a flat color on the figure. I would describe the appearance of his trophy as maybe an ashy brown, but I thought it might be helpful to see some of the color solutions of other produced figures. So I did a little research, and it seems like Morton's color scheme has kind of a wide interpretation, everywhere from chocolate brown and ashy brown to grays ranging from light to dark. My personal taste for coloring Morton tended towards the darker tones. 'Cause dark is where it's at, baby! That's one of the great things about doing a custom. Quite literally, you are customizing it to suit your own tastes. So maybe my interpretation is a little bit darker than you want to go, but whatever you settle on, then your paints! Start with your lighter colors first. It's a lot easier to layer dark tones onto a light one than the other way around. I used a gray primer on Morton, and I probably could have left it right there, but after seeing what a great primer this yellow was for the other Koopalings, I decided I would prime Morton yellow anyway, which worked out great because this primer is really receptive to paint. I used a wheat color paint for Morton's mouth, and red for the inside. It was a pretty big pain to paint the inside of his mouth, and it would have been a lot easier to do before I assembled it, but I still think that this was probably the better way to go. While painting it was difficult, it would have been a lot more difficult to try to protect the paint while I was doing all the bonding with the putty. I painted his head white. Morton was one of the main reasons why I opted for the custom vinyl stickers because he has these really beady gray eyes. I just knew I wasn't going to be able to do to my satisfaction, so I drew and measured them in Adobe Illustrator and ordered a custom bumper sticker. I trimmed out the shape and applied them to the face, and I did need some separation, so I wound up tracing the border with a very fine-tipped Sharpie marker. After his head was completely painted, I drew his little rock star on the side of his face and filled it in with a gray. For Morton's teeth, I'm just going to snip off the pointy ends of the spork and stick them on with a dab of super glue. For his abdominal section, I started out with a flesh color closer to the other Koopalings. It just wasn't looking convincing to my eye, so I wound up going with a light gray. I painted up his shell with a dark gray for the base and a very light gray for the rings, and I used a flesh tone for the spikes themselves. I painted Morton's bracers black and spotted the spikes with silver. Here comes the clown car lightning round! Since the process for the clown car is pretty much identical for all 7 Koopalings, I'm just gonna quickly blaze through this. Gotta go fast! For a more detailed description, allow me to refer you back to the previous episode. Here we go. I modeled the headlights with Milliput, primed and spray painted them. I hit the rim and propeller with some black paint. I couldn't use Bowser Jr.'s support and still fit Morton into the cup, so I trimmed it off and sanded the bottom of Morton smooth. I also filled in the hole in the cup of the clown car to maximize the surface area I had to attach Morton. I poked a hole at the base of Morton and glued in a paper clip. I repeated the process for the clown car, and then I attached the two together with some super glue. To reattach the clown car, I fit a thumbtack into the clear support, drilled a hole in the clown car at the angle I wanted it to sit. With Morton's dramatic pitch achieved and him glued on, another Koopaling joins the battle.
Now that we got this great looking figure, let's box up this bad boy. You can download this box art from a link in the description, and remember, if you want to use the same art that we used for the custom vinyl stickers, those will be available in a description link as well. More great custom submissions from our players at home. Let's take a look. If you want your artwork featured here on Custom Conquest, all you gotta do is tweet your picture at Custom Conquest and make sure you use the hashtag MyCCAmiibo. If you already submitted me a picture and it hasn't been featured in an episode, check to make sure you included that hashtag, and if not, go ahead and send it again. If you don't have a Twitter account but you still want to see your art featured here on the show, you can email it to customconquest@gmail.com. That's it for now, but don't worry, we've got plenty more Koopaling customs coming your way real soon. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for playing! Dark side out. Hey guys, if you could have an amiibo of any character in the world, who would it be? Okay, bye!